What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Key coming back at y'all boys with a brand new reaction video. And now look, I just did one of these like a day ago. What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Key coming at y'all boys with a brand new reaction video. Now today we got another true horror stories video, and I just want to go ahead and get into it. Y'all boys, make sure y'all get y'all popcorn, y'all something to drink, whatever. Sit back, relax, and if you want to feel this experience with me, turn the lights off, make sure it's dark in the room, no weird stuff, and let's get into these scary ass videos, man.
Until I was about 25, I lived in a beach town. My specific neighborhood was about a 20-minute walk from the beach. I'd say about 80% of my personality was beach-related. I've been surfing longer than I've been able to speak, and it would be an anomaly for me to shake out a pair of shoes and not have some amount of sand fall out.
I want to go surfing.
My two best friends, let's call them Armand and Chuck, were extroverted, outgoing, and charismatic. We were all 18 and very much obsessed with girls. It was a Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before school let out. Senioritis had long since set in, and at this point, my friends and I regularly pushed the limits of how much we could get away with without getting in trouble. We already had our coveted college acceptances, so we didn't really care much about high school anymore.
Okay.
Armand and I had plans to meet up with two girls from our high school that we'd been getting along with.
But you gotta think about it though. Before we get into this story, like before we get deep into this story, I always had a thing about beach towns as well, where it's just like, bro, like for instance, if you live in Georgia, you know about Savannah. They say Savannah's a beach town. Savannah, you know, is supposedly like it has like a lot of ghost stories and a lot of things, like people went on vacation and then one of them just like end up dead in the hotel room and all type of weird stuff. Like it just give you chills, bruh.
Really well at school. The plan was to pick the two of them up in the evening and enjoy a cool, breezy night on the beach. We had blankets and a few bottles of wine, the perfect combinations for stargazing on the beach. I don't condone drinking and driving to any capacity, but I was just a stupid kid. I arrived at Sophia's house just after 9. Her and Fran sort of walk danced to the car. It was clear that they had a little something to drink beforehand. Armand and I exchanged some excited grins. It was going to be a fun night. I took a scenic route to a scenic beach. It was about a 30-minute drive. The whole time, the four of us were having a great time in the car, cracking jokes and talking about some mutual friends. At one point, Fran and I were having a very deep philosophical conversation about the nature of time and death and such. We were all very much enjoying each other's company. The specific beach I had chosen had a dirt path that you could drive a car up. From there was a more narrow sand path that we would walk. The path was actually pretty steep, but I had picked it because we were less likely to encounter any other people at such a secluded spot. Furthermore, this beach was further away from the main boardwalk, so the sky would be clearer for stargazing. I thought of everything. I parked my car as far up the dirt road as possible, and the four of us hopped out. Armand and I carried the blankets and wine. I'll fast forward through the boring stuff. After a few hours and an empty bottle, Armand and I found ourselves separating. He and Fran walked up the beach, and Sophia and I walked in the opposite direction. After being separated by a decent amount of distance and darkness, I threw my blanket down and we drunkenly fell asleep on top of it. Before anything happened, Sophia tensed up. At first, I thought it was something that I had done, but then she whispered something. "Do you hear that?" I focused my attention and strained my ears, trying to hear something other than the gentle crashing of ocean waves. I assumed she was just drunk, but then, to my surprise, I did hear something. It sounded almost like a whirring, like the sound a small engine would make. The sound seemed to be moving around. I couldn't pin down where it was even coming from. Then it seemed to fade away into nothingness. "It's nothing," I assured her, eager to resume what we had been doing. And that's what we did. Soon after, I fished my shirt from the sand and shook it out before throwing it over my head. Just then, Sophia, who was still lying on the blanket, shrieked. I whipped around to look at her and saw she was pointing up at something. I looked up, but couldn't see anything besides the blackness of the sky. I sat down next to her to get a better angle, and I was horrified. From her point of view, the moon was perfectly aligned with what appeared to be a drone floating directly overhead.
Oh,
It hovered a little while longer before zipping up into the dark sky and disappearing out
it
of
was
sight.
watching them.
It all made sense. That noise that we had heard before was 100% the drone. I got angry at myself for not realizing at the time. I then got sick at the thought of being watched that entire time.
What the
I
fuck?
glanced over at Sophia and could tell she had the same exact feeling. She put her head in her hands and started crying. I consoled her as best I could before suggesting we walk back to the car. The two of us made it to the car to find Armand and Fran already there. I quickly explained the situation. The two of them were dumbfounded, and I could feel the joy in the air literally being sucked out. I began driving in silence in the direction of Sophia's house, eventually trying to lighten the mood with some conversation. It didn't work, though. The girls agreed that they didn't feel safe going home just yet. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I asked if we could hang out at either of their houses. They both shook their heads, saying their parents wouldn't allow it.
Bro,
My house-
okay, so you don't feel safe, but you don't want to go home to your parents. Make it make sense. Oh my God, bro. And to think that y'all probably being watched and followed all the way home. Which is a smart thing that you didn't go home, actually.
Was off the table for the same reason, as was Armand's. I decided to ask Armand to call up Chuck, which he did. Chuck's house was massive and his parents were super chill. It was honestly the perfect spot. To our delight, Chuck was free. I pulled into Chuck's driveway and parked the car. Armand and the two girls began making their way towards Chuck's front door, and I told them I'd catch up to them in a second. I needed a second to think about everything that had just happened.
Bro, what? You
I was
can't
more
wait to
shaken
get
up
to
than
the
I was
crib?
letting on, so I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes in an attempt to calm down a bit. Honestly, those few seconds with my eyes closed really helped. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, which I hadn't even touched since the incident. The screen lit up, and I stared at the single notification that sat on the display. I had to blink a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My entire body froze as I stared in horror at the lone notification. AirTag found moving with you. Every emotion that I had just expelled from my body came crashing back. We were literally being tracked. I snapped out of my paralysis and jumped out of the car, examining every inch of the vehicle. Nothing on the front bumper, nothing in the grille, and nothing on the back. I started getting desperate, checking the seats and flipping floor mats. Still nothing. By now, sweat was pouring down my neck, and I could feel the hairs on my arms and legs clamping up. I got on my hands and knees and began examining the underside of my car. I got to the tire on the driver's side and began feeling around the tire well. And there it was. It was literally taped to the underside of the well. Impossible to find if you didn't know what you were looking for. I held the tag in my hand for a few seconds before throwing it to the ground and smashing it to pieces.
That don't.
Whoever had watched us on the beach with that drone knew where we were. I didn't feel safe in Chuck's driveway all alone. I picked up one of the broken AirTag pieces and ran over to Chuck's front door. I told everyone what I had discovered, showing them the AirTag pieces to prove it. They were even more horrified than I was, especially the girls. They checked their phones and saw the same notification. Chuck was particularly pissed off because we had been potentially tracked back to his house. After the panic subsided, we spent the rest of the night in Chuck's basement and ended up sleeping over. A couple weeks passed and nothing happened. Honestly, my friends and I were glad to forget about the whole thing, assuming it was entirely in the past now.
Bro. I would have crashed out. What you mean? What you mean? You got tracked back to my house. What do you mean? And the crazy thing is, what type of friend is it for real? Because you didn't even tell him what was going on. You just like, hey, bro, can we pull up? Man, look.
The only way we could rationalize it was that some creep wanted to watch some young adults hook up on the beach and track their car to scare them. It was chilling to think about, but we were relieved that the situation hadn't escalated. One Sunday morning, about 3 weeks after the incident, I got a call from Chuck. He screamed through the phone for me to drive to his house as soon as possible, which I did. When I got there, he was standing in his driveway with a concerned look on his face and some paper in his hand. I was confused until I realized what he was holding. They weren't papers, but rather pictures. I examined them more closely.
It was them.
Pictures of me from that night on the beach. They were grainy and dimly lit, but you could clearly see Sophia and I in revealing fashion. I was disgusted. I could only imagine how Sophia would feel upon finding out. Not knowing what to do, we called the police and explained the situation. They told us that there was essentially nothing they could do, but we insisted that they at least scan the photos for prints. They eventually got back to us saying the photos turned up nothing. Sophia was terrified that whoever sent them would try and blackmail her, and I feared the same. The experience was downright traumatizing. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that, probably because we had gotten the police involved.
What the police
Sophia was never quite the same around me after what happens, and I can't blame her.
Oh, no! She took it back. She took it away. I wouldn't. Why would you take? I mean, no. That would be the right thing to do. That'd be the right thing to do. I'll be worried though, bro. Like, what do you mean? Oh my God, bro. People are so weird.
Only hope those pictures don't turn up later in my life.
You better not get rich and famous.
My best friend Ricardo and I were 19. At the risk of sounding pretentious, the two of us come from well-off North Jersey families and get to enjoy our summers down the Jersey Shore. My house is in Belmar, New Jersey, and his is in Lavallette. It was a random summer night during the week, and Ricardo was driving the two of us from my house in Belmar down to Lavallette, about an hour drive. To be completely honest, I preferred hanging out in Ricardo's house, not only because it was a little nicer, but because the general vibe of Lavallette is more geared towards kids our age. If we weren't scouring the area for a party, we could enjoy some drinks on one of the many private beaches we technically weren't supposed to be on. I could go on and on about things to do down the shore, but for the sake of brevity, I'll try my best to get to the point. As we were driving down, we agreed that we'd opt for a quieter night. No partying, links, or anything that we might normally do. The two of us agreed to snag a few beers, roll a joint, and chill on one of the private beaches under the stars. Honestly, it sounded great. The two of us had been going pretty hard with some of our other friends. A break from partying was much needed. To anyone unfamiliar with the layout of Lavallette, there's a beach side and a bay side.
What's the difference?
Most of the beaches feature a really high dune and a steep drop-off as you approach the ocean. If you were to stand at the ocean edge and look back, you'd see a pretty sizable hill of sand. After drinking a few drinks at Ricardo's place, we snagged some bikes from his garage and made our way toward the beach of our choice. For whatever reason, Ricardo insisted on journeying further than I'd ever been, which I didn't quite understand since all the beaches were basically the same. I really didn't mind a longer bike ride though, so I just went with it. Eventually, Ricardo decided on a desolate-looking beach at the end of the road with no cars parked on it. Every house on the street had its lights off. I actually preferred this. This was back when weed was illegal in New Jersey, and we weren't too keen on getting caught. Plus, we did have some drinks with us despite the fact that we were only 19. We hid our bikes under some shrubs. Then we made our way toward the beach. The two of us lit our J and smoked under the stars, the only sound being the light waves of the ocean and the accompanying wind. The beach stretched on endlessly in both directions, and the sand felt cool underneath our feet. The two of us got progressively drunker while we filled the air with laughter and conversation. Eventually, we just laid back in the sand, watching a sky full of stars in hopes of witnessing a shooting star. That's when we heard it. I heard it first. It was almost undetectable. The sound was like a metallic buzzing, sort of like the sound you'd hear in a massive gymnasium with large overhead lights. I really can't describe the sound any better. It was a faint, metallic buzz that couldn't possibly be anything caused by the beach. I sat up and stared at Ricardo, and I could tell the moment he started to hear it too.
Bro, what?
The two of us whipped our heads in every direction, looking into the darkness for the source of the drone. Strangely, it was difficult to pin down exactly where the sound was coming from. It was just too faint to tell. We were beginning to get freaked out, but were too terrified to move. We assumed that whatever was making that noise would go away, and we wouldn't have to worry about it.
Why would you assume that?
There was literally no way we could be seen from our spot on that beach. It was way too dark, and the sound of the ocean definitely drowned out any sounds we had been making. I know it doesn't exactly sound scary, but I'd be lying if I said my heart wasn't pounding out of my chest. The drone continued on, and after another few minutes, Ricardo gestured for me to follow him. I nodded my head in agreement. Leaving was definitely the best option. Just like a scene from a movie, the exact second the two of us stood up, the droning went from a 1 to a 5. It took every ounce of self-control I had to resist the urge to yell in fear. It wasn't a gradual shift. The sound literally increased in a split second, and it was definitely coming from our right. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a wave of fear washed over me, tensing my body from head to toe. We stared into the darkness and still didn't see anything. But now the drone sounded so close to us that we instinctively started running toward the sand dune. I didn't even know what we were running from. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong and there was someone or something after us. As we were about halfway to the dune, I felt Ricardo place a firm hand on my shoulder, abruptly stopping me from continuing to run.
Wait.
At first, I was confused, but then I saw what...
How y'all running? Make it make sense. How y'all running and he just reach out and tap your shoulder? And you supposed to be following him.
His gaze was fixated on. I glanced up toward the dune and saw it. There was a dark figure standing motionlessly at the peak of the dune. Its arms were freakishly long, almost reaching its knees. It was ridiculously tall, and I was shocked at how it managed to stand so still. It was truly terrifying. Ricardo shouted at me, breaking my gaze from the figure, and we continued running, this time parallel to the beach. We ran to the next dune entrance and sprinted up the slope. As we made our way to the peak, we looked back at where we had just came from. I can still remember the terrifying sight that followed. Not only was the dark figure still on the dune, but there were maybe 3 or 4 more standing motionless on the slope. Each one looked like they were facing us. We didn't have time to go back for our bikes, instead opting to run the entire way home. The next morning, we retraced our steps, but couldn't for the lives of us find those bikes. Maybe they had been stolen, or maybe whoever or whatever was stalking us the night before had something to do with it. Either way, I've never experienced anything scarier on a beach and still have trouble explaining most of these events. The weirdest thing for me is I was never able to determine what the buzzing drone was, and to this day, have not heard anything even remotely close to it.
What you thought it was? Aliens? That one was
Beaches
creepy.
have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house. Or, if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles' beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Me, Charles, and our third friend Riley were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than Charles and I, and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground, so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon,
I ain't gonna cap.
meaning
It's
the back
cool,
end
but
of the
that
house
is way too many entrances for no firearms. Like, y'all tripping, bro. Even though it might be a good area, but it's like, come on, bruh. And they're too young.
faces a narrow channel of water, with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Charles' house. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Charles' backyard pool. It was small, but it was perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joints. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Charles was looking at. One of the girls asked Charles why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Riley jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like, but there was no doubt they were facing our direction.
Fuck, bro?
"Go inside now," said Charles with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from behind us.
Hell nah.
Those guys were swimming across the lagoon.
I told you, no fire.
We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to the room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed, still nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Riley started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle, and he destroyed Charles' mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All of the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Charles' family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Charles' father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators, and likely never will. Charles, Riley, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles' family, and they knew where the key was, and the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night.
I ain't gonna lie, bro. That's creepy as fuck. It's creepy, bro. This is better than a lot of the horror movies they be coming out, bro. A lot of those movies don't be on nothing. But with that being said, man, these are 3 disturbing true beach horror stories. I need y'all to get in that comment box. Tell your boy Key, man. Tell me what y'all think about these videos. If y'all want me to react to more of these or less of these, I ain't gonna be mad at you. You know what I'm saying? We like this, we gang. You feel me? That's only if you hit that subscribe button. The only way. You feel me? So with that being said, man, it's your boy Key checking in, checking out. Make sure y'all boys like, comment, and subscribe. I'm out.